The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight.
So, welcome to the Weird Tales radio show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome. My name's Charles Christian and you're listening to the February the 7th, that's episode 50 of the Weird Tales radio show podcast. As ever, we've got a blinding mixture of stories for you, so let's waste no more time and get on with the first story. Ooh, I do love a good Headless ghost story, and we've got not one, but two for you today. Right, the first one. They both actually walk on the 31st of January, recurring, as in every year. And in chronological order, the earliest one is the ghost of Gertrude Talbot, whose decapitated shade still mourns the passing of her husband, Robert Winter, who was executed on the 31st of January 1606 for his part in the Gunpowder Plot. This was the attempt by, we'd nowadays call them Catholic extremists, to blow up the House of Commons, and House of Lords in London, and kill King James and all his court. Now, one thing that strikes me a bit odd about this is, why is her ghost decapitated? She didn't have a head cut off. She lived to tell the tale and died a widow. This is unlike her husband, Robert, who was hanged, drawn and quartered. And in case you're wondering about that, technically it's drawn, hanged and quarter. You're drawn by being fastened to a hurdle or a wooden panel. In other words, imagine a fairly flimsy piece of fencing or a wooden pallet, and dragged along by a horse across the streets of London, in some instances quite long distances. So you're strapped down in this and you're bouncing around. So not a very comfortable experience. And then you are hanged almost to the point of being dead, whereupon you are emasculated, leave that to your own imagination, disemboweled, and then beheaded and quartered, which means chopped into 4 pieces. Your head would then be covered in tar and stuck on a spike over Old London Bridge for everybody coming into London to have a look at. And your 4 pieces of body would be covered in tar and sent to 4 cities around the country and put on display or over their gates to say, this is what happens to traitors. Yes. A little historical note here. For reasons of public decency, women were not hanged, drawn and quartered for high treason. Instead, they were burnt at the stake. So, cheery thought. Anyway, so that's our first ghost. The wife, the widow of Robert Winter, the Gunpowder Plotter. And our second one, I should just add that the ghost walks at Huddington Court, which is near Worcester, or Worcester, for people who are looking for it and wondering, still puzzling over British English pronunciation. The second one, still in the West Country, is at Staunton in Wiltshire, and it's on a road in this area. And it's a headless horseman who travels around on his horse with a large black hound. The particular man is said to have broken his neck after being thrown from his horse while trying to travel from Wincanton Market to Staunton in less than 7 minutes. Again, not quite sure why the man is headless. He only broke his neck. He wasn't decapitated. However, he was certainly pushing things, trying to make it in 7 minutes. It's 7 miles, and according to Google, it would take at least 13 minutes travelling in a car to cover it. So, 2 Headless ghosts for you to watch out for every 31st of January. Headless horseman in Wiltshire and a headless widow in Worcester.
Something wicked this way comes. Weird Harvest Press presents Harvest Hymns, the sweet fruits and twisted roots of folk horror, a 2-volume set of books investigating the music of folk horror, featuring contributions from some of the biggest names in the field: Candia McCormack, Johnny Trunk, Maddie Pryor, Sharon Krause, Jim Jupp and Kemper Norton, to name just a few. Available now via lulu.com. 100% of all Weird Harvest Press profits are donated to wildlife charities.
Welcome, fool. You have come of your own free will to the appointed place. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
Now, you may recall that in one of our previous programmes, I was coughing and wheezing, and poor Janie, my partner in paranormal crime, was so poorly she couldn't appear at all. One consequence is we actually missed an episode and we're just catching up now. So this next item was meant to be part of our ritual year roundup of calendar events for January. Unfortunately, we missed it. So apologies, and here we go, slightly belatedly, a little story about wassailing. Now, every January in parts of rural England, people still gather to celebrate wassailing, a tradition with distinctly pagan origins, intended to bless the coming year's apple crops and protect orchards from evil spirits. It's an intriguing part of the ongoing connection between the present day and folklore, but the roots of wassailing stretch back even further, back to a time when the Roman Empire's hold on the province of Britannia was collapsing, and how, in the years before King Arthur, a Saxon princess seduced a British king and opened the way to an invasion that changed the country forever. Wassailing can be a confusing concept. It actually implies to 2 separate traditions. There is the home visiting wassailing and there is orchard visiting wassailing. The home visiting wassailing was the pre-Christmas Yuletide practice of people going from door to door in the village, singing songs for exchange for food or a few coins or a drink, usually mulled cider from a wassail bowl. Some of you may recall the Christmas carol, "Here we come a-wassailing among the leaves so green." This was very much a pre-Christmas tradition, and pretty much from the mid-19th century onwards, it gave way to the more genteel style of caroling or carol singing we have today. This was because wassailers who weren't given drink or money might react in the way some Halloween trick-or-treaters do and start egging people's houses, throwing eggs at it. Anyway, then there is the orchard visiting wassail. Now, this usually takes place either on Twelfth Night, which is the 5th or 6th of January, depending on how you count it, or on Old Twelfth Night, or Old Twelvey, on the 17th of January. And just by an added bit of confusion, sometimes it also takes place on Plough Monday, which is the first Monday after Twelfth Night, and the traditional resumption of agricultural work after the Christmas break. And this being the modern family-friendly world, in reality, most wassailing festivities now take place on the nearest Saturday. So if you play your cards right, you can probably go wassailing 3 or 4 times. The nature of the festivities vary from location to location, as do the numbers attending, varying from dozens to hundreds in some instances. The hot spots for celebrations are the traditional apple-growing areas of west of England, Devon, Somerset, Dorset, Gloucestershire and Herefordshire, along with Kent and East Anglia, Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridge and Essex. In fact, the oldest recorded mention of apple wassailing took place in Fordwich in Kent in 1585. Now, wassailing involves music, singing, cider drinking, bonfires, more cider drinking, and varieties of mumming. including performances by Mollymen and Morris dancers and traditional plays, and more cider drinking. As I said, the core element is the cider. But no, it's the ritual waking up of the spirit of the apple trees from their winter dormancy. Because, the days are starting to grow now. We're moving into the new growing season. While at the same time, scaring away any evil spirits or witches who might blight a good harvest and the fruit of the following autumn. Proceedings are led by a wassail king and queen, with the wassail queen first dressing a favourite apple tree by tying either ribbons or strips of coloured cloth onto its branches, along with pieces of cake or toasted bread soaked in cider, or wassail, which is mulled cider. This is a gift to the tree spirits and to show appreciation for the fruits of the previous years. In some areas, the toast and ribbons are hung on the branches of the sapling rather than a mature tree, and there is a suggestion the toast was originally there to attract birds who would help pollinate the apple blossom. The wassail king will then lead the crowd in chanting the following incantation, and there's again widespread regional variations. This is one that goes back to 1791. Here's to thee, old apple tree, that blooms well, bears well. We all come to wassail thee. Hats full, caps full, 3 bushel sacks full, a little heap under the stairs, and my pockets full too. Hip, hip, hooray. Everyone drinks a toast to the health of the apple tree. As I said, there really is a lot of cider drinking, and for those of you not based in the UK, this is hard cider, an alcoholic drink we're talking about, not apple juice. In fact, the UK has the world's highest per capita consumption of cider, which is another reason why holding a wassail on a Saturday is popular, and everybody can sleep off their hangovers the following day on Sunday. Then, as the wassail king pours cider on the tree's roots, everyone else dances around the tree in a circle, making as much noise as possible to wake up the sleeping tree spirits, as well as to scare off any evil spirits, by shouting, singing, stamping their feet, banging drums if they have them, banging pots and pans if they don't, and finally the gunsmen end the ritual by firing a volley of shots in the air, just to disperse any lingering witches. Today, the gunsmen will be local farmers firing off shotguns, but members of military reenactment groups firing black powder muskets are a popular alternative. It's also interesting to note that while apple wassailing almost died out in the mid-20th century, has made a recent comeback, and it's also now a time when children are encouraged to turn up in scary costumes to frighten the bad spirits away. So think on that. Opportunity to reuse those expensive Halloween costumes. It is all distinctly non-Christian in tone, with a strong element of sympathetic magic involved. One early 20th century anthropologist even suggested it was more like tree worship, with cider representing the life-giving blood of the sacred apple orchards. And the fact it takes time more or less around the same time of the year as the midwinter turn of the seasons celebrations also underlines the fundamental pagan origins of orchard wassailing. That said, most people attending a modern wassail are only there for the entertainment, but do go away pondering 2 questions. Why is cider apple growing so important? What does this word wassail mean anyway? The first question is easy, relatively easy to answer, because before reliable, fresh, clean water supplies were available in rural areas, it was more convenient and much safer to take a jug of cider with you out to the fields for refreshment while you were doing manual labour than it was to drink water. Back in 1841, 22% of England's workforce was employed in agriculture, compared with just 1% today. So that was a lot of thirsty throats to slake with cider. But what about the second question? Where does the term wassail come from? Well, this takes us into the realms of early English history. The Old English phrase wassail meant be hale or be in good health or be fortunate, and while originally used as a simple salute or greeting, as in, how are you? Wassail, be hail. It very quickly developed into a drinking formula, where one person would say, wassail, and the other would say, drink hail. By the 8th century, the word was so well known that it appears in the epic poem Beowulf. The rider sleepeth, the hero far ridden, no harp resounds, in the courts no wassail as once was heard. It's even reported that at the dawn on the start of the Battle of Hastings in AD 1066, the Saxons toasted each other with shouts of wassail before they marched off to fight the Normans. Rejoice and wassail, pass the bottle and drink healthy. Drink backwards and drink to me, drink half and drink empty. As I say, a lot of cider drinking. However, tradition says the very first use of the word wassail in England goes back to AD 449, when the Roman Empire's hold on the province of Britannia had collapsed. Essentially, what had happened was the Roman legions left Britain undefended and went off to fight civil wars in Italy and on continental Europe, and local warlords stepped into the power vacuum. And by around the year 425, a shadowy character called Vortigern had established himself as King of the Britons. He was not a popular man. In fact, one historian, Gildas, writing about a century later, described Vortigern as a proud usurper, a man calculated neither for the field nor the council, but wholly given up to the lusts of the flesh and slave to every vice, a character of insatiable avarice, ungovernable pride, and polluted whereby lust. So that's Vortigern. Anyway, 20 years on, 447, Vortigern invited a group of fierce and impious, that's another description of them, Saxon mercenaries led by two brothers, Hengist and Horsa, to help him fight the Picts, who were invading Britain from north of Hadrian's Wall. In return for their services, the Saxons were granted the Isle of Thanet, which is the east corner of what is now the English county of Kent, and then still an island, as their own territory. The Saxons duly fought for Vortigern and invited more of their fellow countrymen to join them, swelling the number of the Thanet colony. Not surprisingly, the growing number of Saxons coming into Kent began to concern Vortigern, and it suggested that it might be time for you to go home. However, in 449, Hengist and Horsa, joined by more Saxons, including Hengist's beautiful daughter, the Lady Rowena, invited Vortigern to a feast to celebrate their friendship. It was at this fateful feast that Rowena, or Ronwen, depending on how you like to spell it, approached King Vortigern with a wassailing bowl, greeted the king with the salute wassail, drank from it, and then passed it to Vortigern to drink from. And so the tradition of wassailing began. Except the consequences in this instance were far more momentous than just a new drinking game. Vortigern became obsessed with Rowena, eventually making her his wife, much to the annoyance of his existing wife and his daughter. His daughter was also his mistress. As I said, he was a lecherous old man. Of course, there is another version of the story which depicts Rowena as a brazen temptress who seduced Vortigern. I don't think he would have needed much seducing. As part of the wedding settlement, he gave Hengist and Horsa the whole of the kingdom of Kent, which didn't go down well with the existing king of Kent, and it opened the way to even more Saxons coming into the country and becoming more and more powerful. Eventually war broke out between the Britons, led by Vortigern's sons, and the Saxons, with Vortigern reduced to a puppet monarch. Some accounts say he was by now a prisoner of Hengist and Horsa, who found himself in the invidious position of being married to the daughter of his nation's enemy. In the fighting that followed, two of Vortigern's sons were killed, but so was Horsa, and by 455, Vortigern was holed up, along with his many wives and mistresses, daughter, in a fortress in North Wales. There he was besieged by two British leaders who'd returned from exile in Brittany. They were Ambrosius Aurelianus and his brother Uther Pendragon, better known to history as the father of King Arthur. The fortress was set alight. One chronicler says a fire fell from the heavens and engulfed the castle, and everyone inside was burned to death. As for Hengist, he continued to rule Kent until his death in AD 488 and sired a dynasty of Kentish kings. And to this day, the emblem of Kent is a white horse. Hengist, it should be noticed, is Old English for stallion, on a red-black background, which was said to have been Hengist's original battle flag. So, next time you go wassailing, remember there's 1500 years of tradition there, and it's not just about drinking cider.
If you want to grow your business, save time using the latest tech, and look great online, Weird Appeal Digital can help. We have a free, yes, that's free download listing 40 digital tools, apps and resources to help you grow your brand, promote your project, generate leads and reach your audience. Just go to www.appeal.digital/weirdtales for smart, effective digital design, and your free download. Go to www.appeal.digital/weirdtales.
We've had a couple of stories recently where the mention of graveyard dirt as an ingredient has been involved. So, graveyard dirt 101. What do you need to know about it? Well, it's a fairly standard magical practice. However, there does appear to be some variations on whether you use actual graveyard dirt or what you might call virtual graveyard dirt. And you will be using graveyard dirt for cursing and hexing, as well as for somewhat less malicious and toxic reasons. So how do you do it and what do you set about it? Okay, well, at its most basic, graveyard dust or graveyard dirt is dirt from a cemetery or from a specific grave. And you can also use ashes and dirt from crematoriums as well. But there is another version that says it's a nickname for various botanicals with no actual relationship with death. One of the botanical substitutes for graveyard dirt is valerian. A strong aid for insomnia, has a foul smell unfortunately, and it's called graveyard dust because it promises you'll sleep like the dead. Similarly, patchouli, also called graveyard dirt because it has a unique wet earth smell. And then there's a herb called mullein, and this is apparently under the dominion of both Hecate and Oya, two powerful spirits with strong associations with death and cemeteries. Some practitioners pick up a handful of surface dirt from a cemetery. Others will obtain their dirt by digging with a grave, digging within the area of a grave. And again, there is a bit of a science as to whose grave are you getting it from, depending on the magic spells you are intending to practice, intending to cast. It might be your mother's grave, or it might be that of a murderer if you've got something rather darker intent. And as I say, some practitioners won't actually use real dirt, they will use the botanicals. And there again, there are some who use a bit of real graveyard dirt but bulk it out with botanicals. Right, collecting dirt. Well, you're probably going to be thinking, isn't that going to be a bit weird if I'm spotted either lurking in the dark or during the day, somebody's going to object. Here's some suggestions for discreet methods of collecting graveyard dirt in broad daylight. If you only require a handful of it, gather it up and carry it home in your pocket or a bag. Now, this is quite clever. If you need a more substantial quantity, rather than cut flowers, bring along a potted plant and transplant that onto the grave. So you dig a little hole for the new plant, take it out of its plant pot and put it in there. But of course, you've removed all that earth to make room for the plant. And that is the soil that you then put back into the empty container you brought the plant in and take it home. Quite a clever little idea, that. In some traditions, gifts of coins or libations to appease the spirit of the dead who you may have disturbed, particularly if you're doing it for some rather more serious digging, it might be a good idea to drop a gift into the hole, say a silver coin or a penny or dose of alcohol. So, graveyard dirt. Practical tips for obtaining it. And we don't just end there, because there are plenty of other dirts you might want to use in magical conjuring practices. There is bank dirt, which is used for anything to do with money spells and financial spells. If you can get a bit of bank dirt or dust, it will apparently draw money into your home. Typically you need some dirt from a bank, your photo burned to ash, and some powdered bayberry root and the dirt from the four corners of your home. This assumes you live in a dirty home and you bank at a dirty bank. Then there's courthouse dirt. This is if you are casting spells to do with justice and court cases. There's crossroads dirt and hospital dirt, which is used in healing works. And then there's police station dirt, which is a variation on the courthouse justice nature. Yeah, I'd like to try that, going into a police station and saying, excuse me, I'd just like to sweep up a bit of your dirt. I've got a black magic spell I wish to cast. And then there's railroad track dirt, which is to be done with travelling, sending away, drawing down, anything where there's a movement element to it. And finally, which is a simple one, this red brick dust, which is used in protection. So mix some red brick dust with some powdered herbs and then sprinkle across the doorways and around the perimeter of your property for blessing and to keep out enemies. There's all you ever wanted to know and more about graveyard dirt. That's it. We're almost out of time, but as ever, let's squeeze in one last story. And this is another one associated with mating divination, love divination, and it's one that the Faroese, that's the people who live on the Faroe Isles, which is that collection of islands somewhere north of Scotland between us and Denmark, which us poor English school kids could never understand because it was always shown in a little insert on the side of the map and appeared to be somewhere totally different. Anyway, Faroese folklore. And it was said on Candlemas, which is the 1st of February, that a maiden would go out on Candlemas morn and throw a stone, and then a bone, and then a clump of turf at a hooded crow. If it flew over the sea, her husband would be a foreigner. If it landed on a farm or house, she would marry a man from there. But if it just stayed put, she would remain unmarried. Now, as the most likely reason a crow, hooded or otherwise, would stay in the same place when you'd thrown stones, bone and clumps of turf at it was you'd stunned it, well, frankly, he deserved to remain unmarried. That's all from me. It's Charles Christian here saying thank you very much for listening. Hope you'll join us again next time, next week. But until then, stay well, stay weird, stay different. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist.icloud.com or on Twitter at ChristianUncut. Good night. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show.